Scott Adams says, talk about the necessity of having a domestic nuclear program to train people for space dominance.
Yeah, it's a fun question because the reasons that nuclear is so great, right, is because when you tap into the energy of the nucleus, you literally are going into something millions of times more energy dense than when you're dealing with like chemical reactions in the electron cloud, right? So diving a little deep on that, when you split an atom, you release on average about 50 million times more energy than when you oxidize or combust like a molecule, a hydrocarbon, for example. That's a huge differential. So to kind of tie this into why we're going to talk about space on this, like that 50 million times larger number is a hard thing for a lot of, for people really to understand. To give an idea of what that means, the average speed at which a person can run is about 50 million times slower than the speed of light. So it's like as if for people, the transformative scale of being able to tap into the nucleus in terms of what we can do for energy is like from a transportation side, if we were to sort of evolve from hunter-gatherer society immediately to having starships that could travel at the speed of light, right? I mean, it's skipping horses and bicycles and cars and trains and planes, all of that. In a way, that's a huge jump, and that's part of, I think, some of the challenges people have had with nuclear, understanding that concept. But because it's so incredibly energy dense, and because it operates, it doesn't need air, doesn't need lots of fuel, it's a great source for space energy. And when you talk about anything that deals with long duration space missions, anything that deals with significant energy demands anywhere in space, nuclear is going to be the backbone of your energy supply because it's going to make power all the time. It's going to make it in the deep, dark depths of space away from the sun. And it's going to make it in places like the moon, for example, where you might have a 14-day lunar day and a 14-day lunar night, 14 Earth day, that is. And so as a result, nuclear is great for that. And so, yeah, having the ability to be able to develop, design, produce these reactors, operate them, is critical for everything we want to do in space. And if we want to actually have a significant presence that's resilient in space and all the infrastructure needed to do that, nuclear is going to be a key element to that. So a big piece of getting there is really having the sort of industry functioning in a manner that's competitive and cost competitive and sees what the broad opportunities are here, both from the government side, but also the commercial side. And I think actually the commercial side is one of the more interesting ones, just because government programs are inherently extremely bureaucratic, slow, and often just way over cost. So, just to give an example of what Caroline said earlier on the license side, for cost, right? We did all of this without having to be reliant on a bunch of federal funding or VC funded. We developed, submitted, and got a license application accepted for review for almost 100 times less capital than had ever been spent to achieve similar milestones before. That's why it's such an exciting time for nuclear startups in this space. Anyway, I answered a bunch of questions on that, Scott, but yeah, that's kind of the thought process.
No, that's awesome. I've got some follow-up questions to that because it's so interesting. And part of it is actually, I'm going to go backwards a little bit to what was discussed a few minutes ago, that you're kind of competing also with marketing that is a counter to nuclear. Is that coming from the fossil fuel industry? And another question, right, if you want to write these down, because I got a lot of questions, is because you're competing with that, and again, because I learned of Mark Schneider, and my inquisitiveness was really kind of piqued when I saw that kind of one-on-one interview that they did. You're also competing with something that Scott Adams calls like Loserthink, right? Which is about people's untrained brains and its kind of consequences on America, so that people now might hear the rhetoric that's anti-nuclear, as Patricia said was happening in Germany, and not have the faculties or the information available to be able to kind of have that kind of introspective type of discourse, the reasoning that's required. So, and then I've got a follow up to that too. I've got a lot of questions. You don't have that in China, right? So when Scott's talking about space, we have that constraint, while as China doesn't.
Yeah. I'm itching to jump on this, so I'll start. I think, maybe especially from my perspective, coming from not knowing anything and being like, oh, is that safe? That kind of seems weird, to like learning about it and being like, why haven't I heard about this before? Which I think is a typical trajectory for people that are hearing about it. It's like, I don't really trust that. And then they learn more and like, oh, the facts kind of bear this out. And then they're like, well, if this is a silver bullet, like probably the closest thing we have to a silver bullet on this planet, like, why haven't I heard about it? And I think one of the first things I really realized after I got into it a little bit further is the it's not really an industry. There's a couple of the biggest players, right? Like GE and Westinghouse, and then the people who own it and operate it are the utilities. And utilities have divided interests, right? They have natural gas plants, they have coal plants, they have solar plants, and they have nuclear plants. And they frequently don't want to promote one over the other. They already feel comfortable with promoting, oh, we're invested in renewables because they know PR-wise that's not complicated. But I've even heard just yesterday, I heard kind of behind the scenes from some stuff that, some utilities don't want to point to nuclear actually doing well in the Texas energy crisis because they don't want it to look better than some of their other assets. So we are constantly, if you want to call it an industry, shooting ourselves in the foot. And I love that Loserthink. I don't remember seeing that. I do follow Scott on Twitter, but that seems brilliant. I think there's kind of two aspects to that. One is, yes, like the whole industry has been made up of people who got through by just like keeping their heads down and doing their engineering work. And so I think there's kind of this mindset of let's just like, don't talk about it. Let's just do our work. No one likes us anyway. And utilities that don't care about promoting nuclear over anything else. And then, yeah, like you said, fossil interests that have actually, obviously, like you can find it out there where they've literally paid for advertisements against nuclear. So it's kind of it's a confluence of things. So there's that Loserthink, I think, on the industry side, but also like, I think the fact that there's not been any startups in this space, people will also ask us like, well, why hasn't this been done before? If you're using technology that started being demonstrated in the 60s, 60 years ago. And it's like that same Loserthink compounded with, I think, I heard this really interesting quote from Steve Jobs that was something like, you have to, founders kind of have to create their own force field of like bending reality around what they want it to look like. And I think Jake mentioned, like, we started this a number of years ago, and you kind of just really have to believe in it and want to work on it and want that reality to come to pass. So.
And then part 3, you forgot part 3, right?
Oh, shoot.
I'm very big on Space Force. I think Dennis Wingo is kind of lurking, and I know some other people. Man _integrated, who's Ross, right? Ross Kennedy is awesome. And we were discussing different parts of Space Force. He was talking about the logistics part. Dennis Wingo was talking about kind of the conceptual framework of where we were, where we are now. I'm huge into Space Force. Big believer. I couldn't emphasize that enough. I really think it's the future of humankind. It's happening so quickly. People don't appreciate how quickly Star Trek is happening, right? But so China doesn't have that same constraint, and they also don't have that same type of diffusion of Loserthink, right? So when you go there, I'm not allowed in China anymore, right? I have a family office and we're not allowed there. But China has almost, I hate to say worshipful because it's not religious. They love Elon Musk. They love America's Space Force.
Yeah.
So they're kind of the exact opposite of kind of the, that Loserthink part of it. They're really kind of excited and anticipating these type of things. So is America going to fall behind China, both in the development of these things and people's perception and welcoming of nuclear? And then they become, right, if they welcome it, then they become kind of evangelists in their own right.
Yeah, that's really true.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is there is a big push. I mean, China's been deploying a lot of the technology internally. They really care about this. But I think one of the challenges too is that, they have to look at is respect to how they're going to be able to be sort of broadly and globally competitive in a manner where, look, I mean, just to be frank about it, right? We still have some of one of our greatest strengths is in the US is our ability to innovate, right? Think about doing things in a different way, in a better way, in a new way. And we're a direct manifestation of that. We didn't take the route that, most people would think, oh, a nuclear company has to do these things. In fact, many of the things we've done, most people said, oh, that's impossible, right? Even from when we started the company, it's like, you can never do that. This isn't a good way to do it. You can't do these things. And we've consistently done those things. Literally within weeks last year before we submitted a license application, a thought leader in the industry was saying, oh, there's no way any advanced reactor license applications are going to get submitted this year, which, just that mindset of how things have to be. We've broken that mold, but that mindset is still prevalent pretty much everywhere else. And I think that's a key enabler on the US side. And on top of that, you do have this kind of growing confluence of recognition of the importance on nuclear, right? In terms of how it plays in terms of climate, as well as energy resilience. I mean, we're hearing people who have, even friends of ours and family, who've been skeptical, right? Especially just in the last few weeks with respect to what happened in Texas, being like, oh, I guess nuclear really would have helped. And it's true. I mean, these kind of things show the importance that you need a resilient energy grid, and that, you need to kind of balance the attributes and strengths of each generation source. And nuclear just happens to have some of the greatest strengths of any generation source imaginable. So it's a kind of inevitability in that sense. And I think at the end of the day, a drive towards electrification just makes this, the adoption and deployment of advanced nuclear technologies on a both domestic and global scale, inevitable. And one cool thing about the US, right, is a lot of countries really like to do business with us over some of the others out there. And I think that puts us in a good spot.
One of the reasons that they want to do that, they really want to do business with us, because I've had businesses all over, and I have a lot of friends in Africa, different parts, South Africa, Nigeria, is because our laws and our regulatory oversight applies. While as in China, the contracts, because there's no equivalent language, right? The contracts, there's a ceremonial contract which will be written in the indigenous language, but the one that actually is significant and that holds is the one in Mandarin, which can only be negotiated back in the People's Supreme Court and back in the judicial system there. So they like American regulatory oversight. They like kind of our legal oversight, our financial oversight that we have here. But does the regulatory oversight of America apply to nuclear? Does that also apply in Africa and some of the countries where you're just seeing enormous scaling?
Yeah. So you're talking about, scaling, and I think, well, to that end, I think you need all sizes, right? And I think that's one of the things that we've always been clear about, but people don't get very much is, and almost back to your Elon question, we wanted to start with our Tesla Roadster, like the thing that's hand built in a mall. Not really, right? But the simplest, smallest MVP kind of product that we could get through the regulatory, that we could really hash out some really important issues that are easier to really talk about and to force the conversation about with the regulator when it comes to that. And yes, we focused on the United States regulatory system for that same reason, what you're bringing up, which is, a lot of countries around the world look at that as some kind of, I guess, gold standard. And we did have investors that were, or, different people who came to us and said, you're doing it the hard way. Why not just go to some other country that has no regulations and just build it? And I will say that's tempting sometimes, but ultimately we believe that we're knocking down the biggest hurdles to really, once we get through this, really have a pathway for like incredible growth, not just in the United States, but also internationally. So I think that's very true. And just to get back to the scaling part, we're starting with this small thing, but we're already on our next design, which is basically 10 times bigger, still very small. But, kind of trying to have different products for different markets. And one of our mottos is like, make reactors people want. And the idea is like, we're not just in it to have a technology zealotry toward, we only like this type or this type or that type. It's like, hey, what works best for these people who really need clean, reliable power, affordable power now? And so that's kind of our mantra.
And so